Music is a quintessential aspect in most people's lives, whether that be in commercials, TV shows, and especially movies. It's everywhere and it's not like you can avoid it. You know how many times I have to hear this fucking song a day? Sorry. Music almost always gives off some sort of emotion. Hell, even the stupid pop songs on the radio give off emotion. Video game music is no different, but unlike your typical song, video game music is always linked to a visual. So the potential of it being stuck in your head is almost always higher than the typical song itself. It's one thing to evoke emotions through key, tempo, vocal tone, or instruments, but it's a whole nother thing when it's meant to be used alongside gameplay in an overarching story. Video game music is some of the most memorable forms of media, but in today's video, we'll go over just how powerful video game music is.
When you say bud, you tell the world you know what makes it all the way.
In the early days, video game music had to work within the limitations of technology.
You're watching the most exciting game you will ever see on your TV set. Telstar by Coleco.
Most games just had some basic sound effects and some had simple melodies, but it was nothing super impressive. It basically sounded like the inside of a McDonald's. And because of this, almost all game music from the arcade boom era became soon forgotten. And this is where things get fun. During the 80s, with the evolution of gaming, composers like Koji Kondo created catchy melodies using what we call chiptunes, aka 8-bit music. I want you to listen to this. Now, doesn't that sound so much better than all that? Finally, gamers can listen to actual music now instead of a half-broken fax machine disguised as video game music. This new version of video game music was now way more enjoyable, which ultimately led to developers releasing official soundtracks. He and many others like Takashi Tatishi were trailblazers for the gaming industry at the time, and they created some of gaming's most iconic music on the NES and Commodore 64. I mean, after all, some of the most nostalgic video game music comes from the 80s. Take, for example, the music that's on Dr. Willy's stage in Mega Man 2 is immaculate. Now you can't tell me this shit don't go hard, bro. Yeah, ay. In the early 90s, developers were still using chiptunes, but right around the mid to late 90s is when video games really took a leap. The transition from cartridges to CD-ROMs allowed for higher quality audio because CDs could simply just store more memory. This now allowed composers to use recorded music. Platforms like the Atari ST and PC supported MIDI, allowing for more complex and versatile music. This led to developers utilizing music way more often in their games. The video game music of the 90s sounded kind of like what the 80s music sounded like, but a lot more dynamic and textured. I mean, listen to this monstrous bass in Mario Paint. I mean, considering this was on the SNES, that's just crazy.
That's crazy.
Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and remember to keep your hands and arms inside the vehicles at all times.
Fast forwarding to the 2000s is where we saw tons of growth for video game music development. As newer video game consoles were being released like the PS2, better music was being developed as well. One of the most notable changes with video game music was the increased use of live orchestras. Games like Final Fantasy X and Halo Combat Evolved featured orchestral scores that added depth and real emotion to the player's overall experience. Games were slowly losing their retro style of sound, but now adopting more of a cinematic movie kind of experience. On the other side, games like Tony Hawk, WWE SmackDown vs. Raw, and SSX had some of the most kick-ass soundtracks. In the 2000s, Tony Hawk Underground 2 soundtrack was a complete representation of that era. Just that fuck the authority, I'ma do whatever I want kind of vibe, you know?
Fuck the cops.
The Tony Hawk games influenced a generation, and part of that was the music. I mean, you can't tell me anything is cooler than doing a handstand manual while also blasting Disturbed's Liberate. Video game music was at its absolute pinnacle with games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band, as they were staples of that era. Obviously, the whole premise of the game is to play an instrument. A lot of the songs in Guitar Hero are permanently burned into my memory. And now today, video game soundtracks rival those of major blockbuster film, thanks to the likes of composers like Justin Burnett and Jesper Kyd. Music is often overlooked in video games because players instead are more worried about chasing high scores rather than listening to arpeggios and all the little frequencies.
I've been called the songbird of my generation.
When a video game composer has the task of scoring a game, the main thing they have to think about is how the music is supposed to make the player feel at a certain time and place. They have to think about things like what it would sound like when a player is up in the clouds, or what it would sound like when they're underground. Like I stated earlier, music portrays a feeling and a message, so when you're playing said game, you would probably want to hear something a little more ambient or playful, like what you hear in Metroid Prime 3. And on the flip side, if you were in a boss fight, the last thing you'd want to hear is this.
Wow, that's amazing.
That would be tragic now, wouldn't it?
Oh, that's tragic.
The music in video games has the power to move us. It can make us feel the adrenaline rush of a boss battle, the sadness of death,
Open fire!
or the joy of victory. Imagine playing Sonic without its music. It would be pretty boring, right? Well, Sonic with music is kind of boring anyways, but you get my point. Video game music also allows us to fully immerse ourselves into the game. It creates the atmosphere of the game world, making us feel like we're right there. The minute you start playing Minecraft, you hear the most tranquil, elegant music you could possibly hear. I mean, listen to it. Doesn't this just make you feel like you're chilling in the world of Minecraft? This music basically describes Minecraft as a whole. Games like Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time heavily rely on music. While this game was legendary for its story, its sounds and music are what really stand out. It was so revolutionary because it was one of the first games that utilized music to its highest degree. The music in Ocarina of Time was fucking amazing. The feeling I felt when I first heard the intro to Ocarina of Time is the same feeling I had when I ate cheesecake for the first time.
Sensational.
It perfectly portrays the emotions and atmosphere of the game, whether it's the serene and soothing melodies of the forest or the epic and intense battle themes. The music really gives a player an emotional connection with the game. Even the main gameplay mechanic in the game was using the ocarina to play music. I remember just sitting in class just humming Soraya's song while not even remotely paying attention to my teacher. Link uses his ocarina to warp to certain places by playing special melodies taught by Sheik. Along with actual game music, developers use stingers. Stingers are essentially short music cues that play at specific moments to emphasize an event. They are often used for dramatic moments like finding a hidden area like seen in Tomb Raider. Another thing I absolutely love when games do is when they use dynamic music systems that adapt in real time based on the character's actions. For example, the music may become more intense during battles and return to a calmer state when the player is exploring. Like in Red Dead Redemption 2, when Arthur Morgan starts a shootout, intense music starts playing, but as the shootout fades, the music fades. One of my favorite indie games is Spelunky, and it encapsulates the feeling of mystery and really makes you feel like you're underground. Take a listen. Music is also often used to signal a transition. In Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake climbs up a ladder and the song Snake Eater starts to play and it gets gradually louder. This moment is one of the most iconic scenes in the entirety of Metal Gear Solid series just because of the music alone. In games with different environments, the music can transition when the player moves from one location to another. For example, the music in the Water Docks level in Super Mario 64 sounds like this, while Bomb-On Battlefield sounds like this. As you can tell, they both use entirely different instruments, so they give off an entirely different vibe while still having that same Mario feel. But the music isn't subject to just being used for gameplay itself. Nope. It's used for pretty much everything in video games. Character entrances, menu screens, boss battles, you name it. In many games, characters have their own themes. This not only defines them, but also helps us connect with them on a deeper level. Let's take a look at Street Fighter 2. Each character has their own stage and their own theme music for that stage. And in Bayonetta, a sultry version of Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra plays during the intro. And when it comes to catchy video game music, the file select screen in Super Mario 64 is unmatched. I mean, that marimba is beautiful. Anytime I think of menu music, which I often do for some reason, I think of this masterpiece. Video games have come a long way since their inception. What started as simple have evolved into, quite frankly, some of the best music that's ever been made. I mean, listen to this. This makes me feel like I'm being lifted into some godly realm, and that right there is one of the main reasons why I love video games, and that is the power of video game music. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, as I'm going to be dropping more content out like this in the near future. Let me know what your guys' favorite video game music is down in the comment section below, and until next time, peace.